It's time to switch on
today's News Talk Radio. Very entertaining. Yeah! TNT.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to this live broadcast. I'm Patrick Henningsen, your host. We're live and direct for the next 2 hours. And as we said before the break, we're going to be talking about a very serious subject. Not only that, there's a new book out. And this new book, I've actually got a copy of it right here, Foreign Entanglements, which is Ukraine, Biden, and the Fractured American Political Consensus. The author is Arnaud Develay, and we happen to have him on the line right now, joining us live from Moscow. Arnaud, how are you?
Hello, Patrick. I'm fine. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us, Arnaud. It's the book is out. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and other fine, hopefully more fine booksellers later on in the next few weeks and months. But fantastic book. Full disclosure, I was privy to an advanced manuscript of this book. And so if you look on the back cover, I did write a very short review on this, and it is fantastic. Now, we've been on this topic, and as our listeners and viewers are fully aware, we've had other guests on and talking about this, the Durkash tapes. Simone Mangianti, the Italian-American journalist, she's been on the program as well after the release of the Durkash interview. And Arnaud, I have to say, and I'll say it again, Arnaud, this is an incredibly detailed and well-researched book. Just tell us the story behind this. What gave you the inspiration to write this? And it's a difficult topic, Arnaud, because so many people have done reporting on this, but yet you've managed to find things that nobody else has found. Tell us about it.
Sure. Well, to be sure, I was traveling in the Donbass during the referendum back in 2022. And I met a few people locally, Ukrainians. Back then, they were Ukrainians. As you know, they are now a new subject of the Russian Federation. And basically, some of the things that are related in my book were somehow alluded to by people who exercised some responsibility there. And so initially, I didn't really pay much attention to it, bent on making sure that the referendum was being carried out in a transparent way. And later on, I somehow decided to look into this. I was somewhat aware of as you mentioned, the Durkash tapes, but nothing more than that, until I started looking into the nitty-gritty of the tapes per se, and the transcript of what was being allegedly said between, at the time, Vice President Biden and former Ukrainian President Poroshenko. And it just basically, it was kind of a thread that I kept on pulling on, and it kept on coming. And I just decided that it was interesting in as far as the geopolitical situation is concerned. And I was basically brought to the conclusion that the only way Ukraine might be such a curtain, for the U.S. deep state to using, to be sure, proxies, including some of the senior figures that we will mention. I realized that there was a complete external control over that country, all the way down to which kind of laws were to be adopted by the Ukrainian Rada, how those laws were then put into effect to essentially outsource the state-owned company, the juiciest morsels of the Ukrainian economy, and turn it into essentially the playground for Western individuals. And basically, as you said, it's interesting that my book is coming out in the wake not only of the Crocus City Hall attacks, but immediately or almost simultaneously as the Russian Federation Investigative Committee has come up with indications, if not conclusion, that the financier behind those attacks were inter alias the infamous Burisma state and oil company, Ukrainian state and oil company, Burisma, which has been obviously mentioned repeatedly during the congressional hearings bearing on whether or not now President Biden ought to be impeached. And so it is interesting to somehow put the whole picture together. Sure, it is about corruption. It is about embezzlement of US taxpayers' money. It is about external management of a foreign country. But it is first and foremost about geopolitical issues and how to essentially affect Europe being completely cut off from a cheap source of energy and thus removing them as economic competitor for the United States.
It's not just that, Arnaud. It's the real juicy part is to execute that strategy that you have just described. There was a whole queue of people getting rich off the opportunities that Ukraine afforded, especially U.S. connected, either officials, politicians. In the case of Hunter Biden, literally the son of then Vice President Joe Biden. All these people were well positioned, including Joe Biden himself, to profit handsomely from some of the, let's say, enterprises on offer, which are kind of, I look at it like this, Arnaud, you're describing a geopolitical hit job. And then there's the side hustles. And there's a lot of side hustles here. So everybody seemed to be using Ukraine as their own sort of personal ATM machine for money laundering, embezzlement, washing U.S. funds coming into the country and then exiting, taking money out of the Ukrainian state budget, laundering it through all these different shell companies. You talk about all this stuff. You've got receipts in here, Arnaud. It's so well documented. And you've got actors like Amos Hochstein, Biden's personal advisor, who's right now in Israel, working as a go-between with the Netanyahu government. He's one of the main protagonists in here. Tell us about some of these connections.
Sure. So Amos Hochstein, for our listeners, is someone well known to the scheme of bearing on gas business, essentially. He was recently the special envoy in Israel and Lebanon, entrusted with trying to solve the issue bearing on the offshore gas block 9, number 9, off the coast of Lebanon. We had a dispute bearing on maritime boundaries. And obviously, all those contracts were signed with those usual suspects, I would say the BP Oil and Chevron and all that. But until this was resolved, those oil fields could not be exploited. And so Austin was on point, basically, in trying to work out some kind of agreement which would allow those oil the gas field, offshore gas field, to be essentially exploited. But Austin was, as you mentioned, involved in Ukraine as I would say, the overseer of what has been referred as the Naftogaz scheme.
This is known as the reverse gas scandal.
The reverse gas scheme, indeed. And reverse gas, for our listener, basically, it's a pretty simple situation. In the context of a taking over of Ukraine, the idea is to basically use some of the Russian gas, which still comes into Ukraine during all that time. We will recall that one of the leitmotif was always that Ukraine was late on its bills. And so basically, that's the idea. Ukraine was receiving Russian gas. The itinerary of the pipeline was designed in such a way that it had to leave the country, go to a third-party country, and re-enter Ukraine. And so the idea, and this was basically discussed during the recordings, the leaked recordings. We'll discuss the circumstances leading to the leaking of those tapes later on. That's an interesting aspect also. Led to basically the Vice President Biden pushing for an increase in the Ukrainian consumer basically a bill. 75% was estimated to be the proper rate of increase. And Poroshenko went above the call of duty and proudly proclaimed that he had managed to actually double the tariff, the bills of the poor Ukrainian consumer. So this whole scheme essentially ended up netting about $1.5 billion, which we can only imagine, was then distributed to all kind of operators. Some of them were actually local people working with. One of them was working at the time with the Ukrainian oligarch Akhmetov. So he had experience in those kind of things. He had set up subsidiaries in Switzerland, and tasked with basically doing this kind of reverse gas business as well. So he had experience in doing that. But this netted a sizable amount of money, to be sure, but made the poor Ukrainian consumers, even poorer, for that matter. So this is but one of the schemes that went on in Ukraine between 2014 in the wake of the Maidan coup, all the way to, I would say, about 2020, 2021. A lot of people started feeling that, the heat was bearing down their neck, and they basically evaporated, But the deed was done and the loot was substantial. And this brings us to Burisma, because Burisma, as a oil and gas company, was already kind of a player prior to the Maidan coup. And its owner, its CEO, Miklas Shosetsky, happened to, somewhat take a few liberties with, money flows, as it were. Keeping some of it for himself, putting it some on his personal account, commingling the funds, in other words, all the while serving as what we would say in the West is environmental minister for the then Yanukovych administration. And so he basically brought attention to then General Prosecutor Viktor Shokin, which we have, heard time and time again in the context of then Vice President Biden infamous confession at the Council of Foreign Relations meeting, when he basically flatly stated that he had given an ultimatum to Poroshenko, in exchange for the 1 billion, lifeline, so to speak. He would ask that Shokin be removed. Shokin, who, interestingly enough, was then later on smeared as someone who was corrupt, when in fact he was probably one of the few individuals in Ukraine doing his job too well. And so basically,
that was a talking point. That was a talking point, Arnaud, that was just being passed around like a memo everywhere you turned. Oh, Shokin's corrupt. No, don't listen to Shokin. Shokin's corrupt. Biden saying this corrupt prosecutor. Shokin's corrupt. Literally, they repeated this for like 2 or 3 years after the fact. There was this character assassination agenda to basically smear Viktor Shokin, and nobody could say why he was corrupt. It was just Shokin's corrupt. Was this to protect Joe Biden?
Well, to protect Joe Biden and to protect also what Burisma ended up becoming, because magically, as you would have it, in the wake of Hunter Biden joining and Devon Archer as such, joining Burisma, a PR operation was put into place, which led to the complete exoneration by early 2016 of Sloshetsky, the unfreezing of the 50 million plus dollars that he had stashed in different accounts in the West, including in the UK. And he's back in Ukraine in early 2016. And by that time, the company acquires new licenses to exploit gas, as it were, in the Donbass area. And so this whole thing is connected in a way that is all too convenient especially when you take into consideration that, and this is almost a red herring because Hunter, everybody is focusing on Hunter, but we had Hunter to sure joining the board. We had the former Polish president Kraszewski, who was also instrumental in getting Sloszewski, then the Burisma CEO, to should I say expand his Rolodex and get new Western friends and rehabilitate itself in the eyes of the new masters of Ukraine. But we also had, interestingly enough, an individual by the name of Kofor Black. Kofor Black was in charge of the counterterrorism unit at the Central Intelligence Agency. He was rumored to have retired back about 20 years ago or so, I said 2005, 2008, at the time when Porter Goss was the director of the agency. But next thing you know, he's sitting on the board. So what kind of experience does, sure, Hunter Biden has in oil and gas business? That's a legitimate question. But, more importantly, more to the point, what would an ex-senior tradecraft CIA operative have in this business? And, there's not much being mentioned about him. That is until Mike Pence kind of basically recentered the debate on what Kofor Black might have been up to in Ukraine under the cover of being a board member of Burisma. And this brings us exactly in the current situation, which is basically that the Russian Federation is now at the highest official level, stating that Burisma was a financier of terrorist attack in and outside of Ukraine. And so this actually fits perfectly with what appears to be the new strategy from the Ukrainian regime, which is a departure from conventional warfare, which has gone really sour by now, as listeners might have gathered, what with the much vaunted counteroffensive to reorient and reprogram itself along the lines of exporting terrorism, hence the attacks on the Crocus City Hall, and maybe more to come if we go by what Victoria Nuland ominously referred to on the way out from the State Department.
No, we're going to go to break real quickly here. I'm with Arnaud Develay, author of Foreign Entanglements, also human rights lawyer. We're talking about the new book, Foreign Entanglements, and how this traces back to the Biden administration. Foreign Entanglements is the book, ladies and gentlemen, and you definitely want to pick this up. I'm just saying it is a great resource right now. I mean, few people have managed to put all of the evidence together up to a certain point recently in the timeline that really provides, I think, I can only describe this really as a damning indictment of all of the U.S. grifters who had their hands in the cookie jar in Ukraine, but also on the Ukrainian side, it just sort of documents the corruption there. And you're talking about Burisma and the recent revelations of the financing of terrorism, and some of these companies were used to wash money for black ops. That certainly explains why somebody like Kofor Black would end up on the Burisma board, and also that they used the BCCI, the infamous BCCI bank, to do this very thing for years, decades, in fact, in Central America, and running dirty wars right the way around the world. And it requires, Freddie Ponton, who was on the show yesterday, explained why this is necessary. You need shell companies and banks that the CIA can do business with to finance black ops and to do sort of nefarious things around the world. So that's what we talked about yesterday on the program, and Arnaud's kind of alluding to this right now. Arnaud, the other person, and I want to talk about that, this subject of the connection with terrorism, because it's recent. Arnaud, the timing of these revelations with Burisma and the Russian investigation, and then your book coming out this week, is kind of uncanny. I mean, you probably we're wondering, your publishers must have an incredible PR machine, or you're just really lucky. I think probably the latter, Arnaud, but the timing certainly is excellent, and it kind of like explains in this book how these things are able to happen. So pretty amazing timing. I mean, you must have been shocked this week to see those revelations come out and go global at the very time your book's coming out.
Yeah, to be sure, it's kind of spooky, but it is what it is, and basically, to the extent the book somewhat sheds a light on the background leading up to this situation we're in. Yes, it's a perfect fit, one would say. Uh, but it's interesting because it all takes place also in a very contested U.S. presidential election, and we have this kind of lawfare campaign being waged against the main opponent to the incumbent president, which happens to be, appearing front and center in this whole saga. And so you get the feeling that whereas 2016, and I talk about this in my book as well, was an attempt early on in the election campaign season to take out or at least to impede the then candidate Trump presidential campaign. And it all starts again in Ukraine. This is the interesting thing, again, is that Ukraine is a recurring theme the last 8 years as a background to U.S. presidential politics. And at the time, Trump is not even a threat. He's just this kind of flamboyant real estate tycoon who decides to throw his hat into the ring. And next thing you know, he's beating out 15 rivals within the Republican Party. And this is now becoming increasingly real and credible that he might just, be elected.
Yeah, because you're right.
That's
No one took him seriously, Arnaud, until Super Tuesday, until after the Super Tuesday primaries of 2016. So, I mean, you're absolutely correct. He wasn't regarded as he was regarded as a potential threat going into the new year, but not really a serious threat till after Super Tuesday. But you're saying by then the machine was already in gear to damage him and all of his associates. And it looks like from your book that what you're talking about is the targeting and kind of public assassination of Paul Manafort, who was the head of Trump's campaign at the time. That all was hatched in Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. I mean, to be sure, Paul Manafort had been working in Ukraine under the Yanukovych administration. And when he was tapped to become the director of the Trump campaign, which basically is a candidate doing very well, beating out those rival in the Republican Party, and increasingly looking like a serious threat to the powers that be, who, let's not forget, had deeply involved themselves by then, when basically summer, September 2016. By then, the external management of Ukraine is 2.5 years old. And so we can only speculate that the Uniparty or the deep state and the people who are basically within the political arena associated with this kind of permanent Washington establishment are seeing this kind of individual just coming out of nowhere, and everybody's starting thinking, if this guy remotely gets a chance to take a look or be informed or somehow meddle with what we're doing there, the whole geopolitical ploy is falling apart. Not to mention the uncovering of dirt on senior Democratic officials. And so we have to, basically do everything we can, starting right now, and at the time we're in July 2016, to prevent this from happening. And interestingly enough, it's this passion in going after Trump is what somehow should have raised alarm. I mean, if he was just a corruptible man or a corruptible politician, someone who can bring in and brief on certain things, there's no reason to assume he would not play ball after all, right, at the time. But somehow they decided to basically give him the treatment of someone who's kind of like a peasant trying to invite himself at the table of the Lords. And so that had the direct effect in basically getting Trump to, Trump was all coached by and trained and brought up by no other than Roy Cohn. And Roy Cohn was not known as someone who basically took, blows lying down. He gave back as much as he received. And so that was a major miscalculation. But to come back to Manafort, yeah, to be sure, it all started then. And it started, interestingly enough, using the Ukrainian Secret Service. Actually, let me rectify this. Someone who at some point had been a senior official of that agency, but for whatever reason was let go to be demoted as a mere, basically, not advisor, but I would say a trainer, a professor of state spycraft. And next thing you know, the guy's name is General Trebek. It's an interesting figure because next thing you know, and this is someone who knows the law, right? But he somehow happens to stumble on what became known as the Black Ledger, the Black Book, copies of it, to be sure. And those were left on the stairwell of his apartment building, at his domicile. And so he basically alleged that, someone had come and dropped that off, for him. And he somehow decided to, rather than take it to the proper authorities, he went on a media who happened to be financed by George Soros, Zerkali Nediele. And only then, afterward, does he go to the SBU. And so the problem at the time is that on the line where Manafort's name is alleged to figure, there is no signature. There are obviously other names with amounts received and their signatures, but on Manafort line, there is no signature. It's just some kind of a scintilla of evidence, but nothing hardcore. And to make matters worse, the Ukrainian criminal code procedure basically calls for extra independent evidence to corroborate any kind of whistleblower coming out with the ledger, as it were, the black book. But coming up with a black book on its own without any kind of independent corroborating evidence was not going to cut it. So this ended up essentially going nowhere, legally speaking, and basically leading the Ukrainian regime to say that they would not prosecute Manafort. Why? Because he was an American, as if that made any difference in any other countries on any other type of crimes. But this was important in such a way that it allowed for the media campaign, the smear campaign, to do its effect, do its work, and force Manafort to essentially resign from the Trump campaign. And so we can assume that the calculation was that by beheading the Trump campaign of its mastermind, its major coordinator, the campaign would then flounder. But that's not what happened, as we know now. And this instead led the way to, pave the way for the narrative that would then plague the Trump administration all the way to May 2019, when the Mueller report was finally made public and there was no collusion, the Russiagate, Trump being this Manchurian candidate. And so it became, to be sure, paramount to link Trump or to characterize his miraculous election, this surprise election against the establishment's candidate, as somehow of a Russian operation. And everything was then, everyone would recall, done to basically prevent him from doing any kind of substantial work. Maybe, allowing him to do a few things on the domestic front, but as far as his foreign policy was concerned, he was basically prevented from doing anything, especially putting his nose into Ukraine. That is all the way until we're in 2019. And at the time, Trump is hearing some kind of rumors that there's a lot going on in Ukraine. And as we know, with the 2020 re-election campaign coming, he gets the idea to send his trusted legal advisor, Rudolph Giuliani, America's mayor, someone who cannot be suspected of working for anybody, a real patriot, the one who basically brought the nation, New York and the nation together as America's mayor in the wake of 9/11. And so Giuliani, being trained as a prosecutor, first and foremost, decides to go to Ukraine and basically run an investigation and talking to who he believes at the time are the right people. And this is when we are introduced to such individuals as Andrei Derkash, known later on for the leaked tape, the Derkash tapes, because he organized a few press conferences where he allowed for some of the content of the tape to be explained to the public and what the implications were. But also, I would say, a junior prosecutor, Alexander Kulik, who also was very helpful in getting those things done. And someone known as Alexander Dubinsky, also, who was a former MP at the Rada, journalist and MP, and who is now, interestingly enough, rotting in the Kiev jail. And so Dubinsky is jailed. Kulik is not authorized to leave Ukraine. Shokin is also not authorized to leave Ukraine. And Derkash was on the run. He somewhat disappeared in early 2022. This was actually reported by, as you mentioned, Simona Maggiante when she interviewed him about 3-4 months ago in Minsk. Mm-hmm. And we found out that no other than that she's saying that, or to be sure, there are no independent corroborating evidence on that, but that the Secretary of State Blinken visited Kiev in January 2022, so about a month before the start of the special military operation, and basically told Zelensky in no uncertain way that we have a problem, and unless you take care of it, we will take care of it. And at that point, Derkash, having his own informers, knew that it was time to go. And so, he had.
And I know you talked about this, Arnaud. You talked about this on RT International just recently during a segment. Let's bring that clip up, actually. This is Arnaud Develay just a couple of days ago. Let's go ahead and roll that.
Now, there hasn't been a direct link made to the Crocus City Hall terror atrocity, but judging from the allegations that we're hearing, is it more likely than not that the oil and gas company Burisma Holdings was involved in some way in financing that attack?
Well, this is something that the Russian Investigative Committee is going to have to determine, to be sure. But this is nothing new. I actually have a book coming out tomorrow called Foreign Entanglements, which covers the Burisma Biden saga. And this goes back to 2014. We know that there were bribes paid to close out some of the case files against Dan Sloshevsky, the CEO of Burisma. And the company became essentially a vehicle to launder taxpayers' money. I would point also to the tapes released by, or made public, should I say, by Andrei Derkash, the former Ukrainian MP, back in 2020 on this issue, in which he perfectly establishes all the links, whether about Hunter Biden, the Naftogaz situation with Austin. And now we have an interview that came out recently from Minsk, by Simona Maggiante. She interviewed Derkash, who is now in hiding, fearing for his life. Blinken came in January 2022 in Kiev and basically told the Zelensky regime, you've got to resolve the Derkash situation or else we will do it ourselves.
So there we are, Arnaud. So, I mean, there's so much evidence now that almost kind of vindicates the accusations made by Andrei Derkash about a slush fund for black ops, assassinations, terrorist attacks. Even mentioned Nord Stream in there. This might be tangentially connected to the Nord Stream operation. So we have all of these people. We have Konstantin Kulik, who you mentioned before, who was a prosecutor. You have Andrei Derkash, former MP. You have Viktor Shokin, former prosecutor general. You have Oleksandr Dubinsky, who was working closely with Derkash. All of these people should be testifying in Congress to the congressional committee on Biden corruption and Biden activities in Ukraine. I mean, these not the best witnesses Congress could have? And they can get them if they wanted to. They'd have to provide assurances and maybe give the proper orders to Kiev. But this isn't happening, Arnaud. The opposite's happening. Are we witnessing a cover-up?
Well, this is actually the heart of the matter as far as those impeachment hearings are concerned. It's just not like an instance of political theater aimed at basically creating a diversion from the real issues in this. Because as you say, if you really wanted to establish the links and what the Democratic Party has been saying as far as there's no direct chain of causality between what you are alleging and the crimes, those four individuals would be able to provide all the goods. Yet, there are no subpoenas being issued. We learned that at the FBI, who was relying for 20 years on an informer, the informer himself, somehow, he must have been the person, named in the 1023 form. This guy was himself basically sold down the river now. So there's a lot of pressure at every level to make sure that none of this comes out, because if it does, it's not just the Ukraine operation that basically is revealed. It's the level of corruption and how dangerous, this profligacy from the Washington establishment has become, with basically a risk of World War III, because with the terrorism phase now entering its full phase, we are dangerously teetering on the brink of precipice here, launching terrorist attack in the heart of a nuclear armed power who understands perfectly the ins and outs of what's going on and who's ultimately behind it. And to be sure, if we go by what former Russian President Medvedev seems to have alluded to in a recent post, is they're going to go after every single one of them. We could have like an arrest warrant issued against some of the principals that we've mentioned tonight, the Cofer Blacks, the Hunter Biden, the Devon Archer, and to the extent his presidential immunity is removed in November, then President Joe Biden. So this is a whole house of cards that could be coming and crashing down, and basically exposing Washington. The swamp, as it were, in ways that would be unprecedented, and that would certainly lead to unprecedented political chaos in the United States.
Well, all we can say is one thing that this book does is it vindicates Rudy Giuliani and all the things that he was saying, the depositions that he took while he was in Ukraine. It vindicates Donald Trump's suspicions, of course, among other things. But it also says that there was no Russian interference in the 2016 election, but there was Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election. I mean, that's pretty clear from this book, Arnaud. So, I mean, this is why I really encourage people to get a hold of this. It's not a long read. It moves very quickly. And the receipts are there, the footnotes are there, the research notes are included in the book. You can follow up on pretty much every single fact in here. Tremendous job on your part, Arnaud, to put this together. It's a very complicated story, very complex case, and this is, I think, one of the things. It's so daunting. It's probably put a lot of people off writing books like this, because you really have to put your nose down and see where the rabbit holes go on this. And you've absolutely done that. I think it's going to provide a great foundational platform for other people to take your research and then add to it, which is, I think, something that you're very keen happens as well as a result of the publication of this book. Foreign Entanglements is the book, ladies and gentlemen. Arnaud Develay is the author. Ukraine, Biden, and the fractured American political consensus. Arnaud, we really appreciate it. Just give a shout out to where people can get a hold of this book And what's do you know what it's retailing for, etc. In the U.S.? Is it available in Europe or any other languages? Go ahead.
For now, it's only available in English. I intend to get a Russian translation done, in the shortest delay. But for the time being, people can find it on, as you mentioned, Amazon and Barnes and Noble.
So I think, it might be on the shelves in Barnes and Noble, hopefully, in the coming weeks and months. But yeah, definitely, you guys show your support for Arnaud on this. Get a hold of this. I think everybody needs to read it, especially if you're participating in the next U.S. general election. I think you need to have a little bit of background here. This is going to help, hopefully, and help inform which way you might be voting. Unfortunately, there are some people, actors, who are part of this story who are still in office, believe it or not. There's a few of them knocking around Capitol Hill. But I think this is instructive. Great timing, Arnaud. Glad that this book is out now. And you've done a tremendous job. And again, thank you for your time. I know it's late in Moscow, so you've really stayed up for us here. I really appreciate it, Arnaud.
Thank you, Patrick. Always a pleasure.
There he goes, ladies and gentlemen. That is Arnaud Develay, author of Foreign Entanglements. And great book, folks. We're going to be going deeper into this. We're also going to make public a couple more interviews and a bit more analysis on this book in the next couple of days and weeks. So look forward to that. Anyway, we're going to take a break here. Top of our news headlines. Coming up on the other side, Basil Valentine. Stay with us. We'll be right back.